Have you ever doubted your own mind? Ever felt like everyone around you was pretending, smiling just to keep up appearances, while something dark was unfolding behind the curtain? What if the greatest threat in your life wasn't a monster, but real people? Family members, doctors, trusted figures, all working together to convince you that you're going crazy. This is Jully's story. And perhaps it's the story of many people living in absolute silence today, after years of hospitalization. Jully returns to her father's house to start over. But the mansion, which was supposed to be a place of healing, soon reveals itself to be a field of emotional manipulation. Her father is missing. And worse, Jully begins seeing his body around the house. Visions that disappear when she tries to show them. Screams that no one hears. Every time she tries to seek help, she receives looks of disdain and ready-made diagnoses. They say it's stress, that it's all in her head. And so slowly, they try to erase the only thing that keeps her alive, the truth. This video is a powerful and moving retelling of The Cry of Terror, an underrated psychological thriller from 1961. But here, it gains new layers, new truths, and a new name, Jully. Through this narrative, we'll explore the invisible effects of gaslighting, the limits of sanity, and the emotional toll of being disbelieved by those who should protect you most. If you've ever felt like the world tried to silence your voice, this video is for you. Because sometimes, madness lies in those who deny the pain of others. And the greatest strength lies in those who survive even when no one believes them. The black car stopped in front of the mansion with the muffled rumble of tires on wet gravel. Jully, her hair loose and her gaze restrained, got out slowly, as if stepping onto ground she no longer recognizes. Time seemed to stand still there. The same imposing architecture, the same garden manicured with almost cruel perfection, the same windows always too closed. But inside, everything had changed. After years away from mental health treatment, she returned to her father's house, carrying a suitcase and many invisible scars. The doctor's advice was clear: avoid stress, avoid conflict, remain calm. But how can she remain calm when the first face she doesn't see is her father's? His absence at the gate, where he always waited for her when she was little, tore at her heart with the force of an unresolved memory. And it was with that first step into the house that Jully knew something was wrong. It wasn't paranoia. It was insight. The hallway seemed darker than it should have been. The paintings hanging on the walls weren't in their original locations. The maid, who usually smiled when she saw her, looked away and simply waved. And her stepmother, with a cold hug and a calculated smile, spoke sweet words that didn't match the expression in her eyes. Jully was no longer the fragile girl they knew. She had learned to observe, to perceive tones in voices and micro-expressions that reveal what words try to hide. Understanding her own mind had made her stronger. Now she saw what no one wanted seen. That first night, alone in her old room, hugging the pillow that still held the scent of childhood, Jully felt something chill her spine. It wasn't the weather. It was the dense silence. It was the sensation of being in a place where affection had been replaced by manipulation, where hope seemed locked away along with secrets waiting to be discovered. Even though she was afraid, Jully knew her presence. There was no coincidence. Intuitively, she sensed her return was connected to something greater, something that needed to be revealed. And while part of her simply wanted to rest and forget the past, another part, more alive, more aware, knew that true love for herself required confrontation. The humanity Jully had cultivated during the difficult years now gave her the courage to look at what she had always avoided. She hadn't returned just to reunite with her father. She had returned to reconnect with her own history, even if that required traversing the shadows of that house. The mansion wasn't just the setting for her childhood. It was an emotional labyrinth, laden with absences, lies, and broken memories. And Jully, armed with empathy and a heart that knew resilience, was about to discover that some truths aren't hidden forever. On the second night, the house revealed its first scar. Jully woke up startled in the middle of the night. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive. She got up slowly, guided only by the dim light leaking from under the hallway door. Her bare feet touched the cold floor as her heart raced for no apparent reason. That's when she saw it. At the end of the hallway, standing before the old grand piano, was her father's body. Motionless, his eyes open, his skin pale. Jully froze. An involuntary tear escaped. But when she blinked, the body was gone. Nothing, no mark, no sound, no trace. Disoriented, she ran to her stepmother's room. She explained, in a trembling voice, what she had just witnessed. The answer came like a blow. "Jully, you need to rest. This is just your mind playing tricks." And so began the worst torture of all, the disbelief, the emotional erasure. The gaslighting disguised as kindness stopped from that moment on. The apparitions intensified. In the bathroom mirror, in the shadows of the garden, in the cracks in the stairs. Always brief, always when no one else was around. Always disappearing as soon as she tried to prove it. Her father's body appeared with the same look, as if asking for help, as if begging to be discovered. And Jully, between fear and courage, began to question whether she was truly losing her sanity, or if she was about to uncover something no one wanted her to know. The greatest terror wasn't seeing the body, but realizing that everyone around her seemed to want to convince her she was crazy. The emotional intelligence she had developed during her hospitalization was now put to the test. She had to discern between intuition and delusion. She had to trust herself like never before. And that was precisely where the tables began to turn. Jully began recording these moments in a hidden notebook. She wrote in detail about her visions, her schedules, her feelings. Like an emotional detective, she wanted to track patterns, map sensations, find logic. This approach wasn't just a search for answers, but also a way to preserve her sanity. A practical strategy anyone experiencing emotional turmoil could adopt. Writing is liberating. It's organizing internal chaos. It's creating a thread of trust between reason and feeling. And in Jully's case, it was an act of survival. She could no longer trust her stepmother, the doctor, or the false looks in the house. But she could still trust her courage, her inner sincerity, her wisdom built through pain and overcoming. It was the beginning of a journey where the greatest weapon would be the truth. And behind the scenes of this mystery, Jully little knew that the atmosphere inside the house would become even more suffocating. The days following those visions revealed an atmosphere denser than the silence that enveloped the house. The mansion seemed to breathe on its own, as if there were eyes in every corner, listening to everything, judging every movement. Jully, now more attentive, began to notice what had previously gone unnoticed. Her stepmother walked with too soft a step, as if avoiding being overheard. The servants exchanged quick glances when she entered the rooms. And the family doctor, always elegant, always calm, repeated the same speech. "You need to rest, Jully. You're recovering." But there was a rehearsed, almost robotic tone. The carefully constructed false kindness hid something much darker. It was like living in a theater where everyone knew the script except her. The feeling of being surrounded by masks forced her to observe more deeply, to activate her emotional intelligence to understand what was going on behind the pretty words and rehearsed smiles. Jully began to realize that it wasn't just her father's absence that disturbed her. It was the emotional emptiness of the house. Nothing there felt authentic. Not the decorative objects, not the silent lunches, not her stepmother's gestures, which were always measured, as if watched by an invisible camera. It was as if everything had been carefully engineered to make her feel strange, out of place, insecure. Understanding the dynamics of that house required insight, and she had it. Recognizing patterns of manipulation was one of the skills she had developed in therapy. And there, in every cutting word disguised as care, in every protective gesture that felt like imprisonment, Jully saw the game. It was a house where genuine affection had been replaced by a strategy of control, where humanity had been domesticated until it became convenience. It was an environment that stifled hope and made loneliness a constant companion, even when surrounded by people. Amidst this climate, Jully searched for ways to maintain her lucidity. She began meditating every morning at dawn in front of her bedroom window, trying to reconnect with herself. She read excerpts from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which she stumbled upon in her father's old office. It helped her stay grounded. She also began drawing compulsively, as if the pencil translated the emotions she couldn't verbalize. She knew that to resist the environment that was slowly eroding her, she would need courage and perseverance. It was a game of resistance, of internal reconstruction in the face of an emotional minefield. And even though she was afraid, she chose to move. Each step required humility, initiative, and above all, self-confidence. But Jully still had no idea that what would shake her most was yet to come. Something that would test everything she believed about her own sanity. It was inevitable. As much as she fought with all her might to maintain control, Jully began to feel the cracks within her opening. The visions continued. Her father's absence was increasingly palpable, almost physical. The house breathed, whispers seemed to emerge from the walls, and the sidelong glances of those around her made it clear. Everyone knew something she didn't. But the worst part wasn't the feeling of being surrounded by a secret. It was the torment of beginning to doubt herself. What if all this is just another episode? She wondered. What if my mind is creating these images? Insecurity took shape like a thick fog. Even with all the wisdom she had gained throughout treatment, Jully now found herself facing an invisible and devastating threat: the instability of her own perception. She remembered the therapist's advice, the breathing techniques, the emotional diaries. She tried to maintain her routine, but the days didn't follow a logical order. Sometimes she woke up unsure if it was day or night. She lost objects, confused voices. Memories became blurred. The fear now wasn't just of being deceived by others, but of being betrayed by her own mind. And this is where the darkest side of the human experience comes in. When we can no longer trust what we feel, think, or see, the ground crumbles. And it is in this void that loneliness cruelly sets in. Not the physical kind, but the emotional kind, the kind that corrodes from within. The absence of understanding, of support, of a voice. Jully began to walk more cautiously, as if stepping through a field of emotional mines. And each step was marked by an almost Herculean effort to remain whole. Even amidst the chaos, she tried to reclaim her humanity. She began writing letters to herself as a way to reconnect with her essence. In one, she wrote, "Jully, if no one believes in you today, you can still believe in yourself." The phrase became a mantra, and with it, she rebuilt a bridge between fear and hope. Writing at that moment was more than therapy. It was an act of emotional survival. This practice, which anyone can adopt, is a powerful tool for self-knowledge and resilience. Writing to oneself in moments of doubt helps restore clarity. It helps separate what is real from what has been induced. And that's how Jully, even in shambles, kept the flame of consciousness alive. But there was something lurking. Something that had not yet revealed itself. Something that would push her out of this abyss of doubt. A new presence would emerge, bringing with it the thread of hope Jully so desperately needed. It was on a cloudy morning, while observing the garden from the hallway window, that Jully first saw the new gardener. A simple man, modestly dressed and with a calm gait, who seemed out of place in that setting of controlled luxury and polished phrases. His name was Robert. He weeded the garden carefully, as if conversing with the earth. Something about him caught Jully's attention. Perhaps it was the way he avoided contact with the other employees. Perhaps it was the respectful way he looked at her, without judgment, without pity, without fear. It was the look of someone who recognizes the other's pain, even without knowing their story. A look filled with humanity and compassion. For the first time in weeks, Jully felt she could breathe outside the emotional prison of that house. And in a world where trust was a dangerous luxury, Robert seemed like a possibility of escape. Their first conversations were brief, exchanged between the rose pruning and the morning watering. But every word they exchanged was a step toward trust. Robert, with his calm and sincerity, demonstrated a rare emotional intelligence. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't question Jully's views. He simply listened, respectfully. And truly listening is an act of generosity few know how to practice. He began to discreetly help her observe things others tried to hide. Doors locked for no reason. Phones that rang and were answered with secrets. Meetings in the doctor's office in the wee hours of the morning. Robert noticed. Jully took notes. And little by little, the collaboration between them ceased to be mere complicity and became a true investigative plan. It was like a silent dance between two wounded souls who found healing in each other's pain. Robert was the opposite of home. Where there was rigidity, he was flexible. Where there was arrogance, he offered humility. Where there was control, he offered freedom. It was impossible not to feel inspired by his presence. Jully's courage seemed to grow when she was near. With him, she was able to share her letters, her doubts, her pent-up anger. And he, instead of trying to fix her, simply validated her pain. This, in itself, was a gesture of love. Not the romantic, idealized kind, but the genuine love born of empathy, acceptance, and the choice to walk together, even without promising solutions. And if sanity hung by a thread, it was in this bond that Jully found strength. But like every tense story, just as something starts to go right, fate prepares a new test. And Jully was about to discover that, even with allies, the game was still far from won. Jully and Robert's silent investigation began to take shape. With organized notes, timed schedules, and detailed observations, they began to gather evidence that something sinister was indeed happening in that house. One night, Jully found a note hidden among the library books. The handwriting was her father's, and it read, "They are trying to silence me. If anything happens, look in the recordings." It was the kind of evidence that confirmed all her suspicions. She rushed to show Robert the next day, but the note had disappeared. There was no sign of it, as if it had never existed. Where she had hidden it, only dust and meticulously arranged books. It was the first blow. The first clear sign that someone was one step ahead. Someone not only monitored every action, but also coldly manipulated the details. And this realization was more terrifying than any ghost. Soon after, a photograph Robert found in the old greenhouse files disappeared. It was a rare image, taken weeks before Jully's father disappeared. In it, he was seen arguing with the family doctor in front of the house. His gaze was tense, his posture rigid. The photo was proof that something more existed between them. But like the note, it disappeared. So too did the recording of a phone conversation Jully overheard behind the door. When she tried to record it on her cell phone, the audio was mysteriously erased. It was like fighting a ghost with silk gloves. Every piece of evidence she gathered dissolved like sand between her fingers. Frustration began to erode hope, and even with Robert's support, Jully felt surrounded by forces that controlled everything. The mansion proved to be a field of manipulation, where the truth was dismantled before it even took shape. A shadow theater where the villains knew every move before the curtain rose. Still, Jully refused to give up. Perseveringly, she adapted her strategy. She decided that if the physical evidence didn't hold up, She would keep records in unexpected places. She wrote parts of the stories under the closet carpet, typed others in unsent emails, and hid copies in idle objects around the house. It was a way of fighting back, of asserting her intelligence, even in the face of a force that seemed to control every inch of that space. Robert did the same. They began communicating with visual codes during the day, and with coded phrases during walks in the garden. Each step was an act of rebellion, a declaration that, even under fear, there was still courage, resilience, and an unbreakable desire to break free from the lie. But Jully knew, deep down, that resistance wasn't enough. She would need to dig deeper. And it wouldn't be long before a dark revelation lit the next spark in this silent war. It was during a nighttime storm that Jully discovered the document that would change everything. It was in a secret drawer in her father's old office, hidden under the false bottom of a cabinet that only Robert could pinpoint. There, among old papers, was a copy of the will redrawn just weeks before the disappearance. In it, Jully's father left almost all assets and control of the property directly to his daughter, invalidating any previous rights held by her stepmother. Jully's hands trembled as she held the paper. This was more than a signature. It was a silent confession of trust, a decision of love and respect from someone who perhaps knew her time was running out. But above all, it was the key that connected all the suspicions. Now there was a clear motive, a direct interest. And anyone with something to lose also had something to hide or eliminate. The emotional impact of that discovery was overwhelming. Jully felt torn between gratitude for being valued and anger at the attempt to erase her story, her heritage, her dignity. She recalled every sentence her stepmother had spoken with feigned tenderness, every careful touch that now seemed like a strategy, every doctor's appointment that discredited her. Everything took on a new color. The mask of kindness was falling. The mansion, once oppressive, now seemed like a chessboard of meticulously engineered manipulations. Jully remembered her therapist's voice from years ago. The power of kindness lies not only in giving, but in recognizing when it is false. The phrase made more sense than ever. She now understood that she had become a target not because she was weak, but because she posed a threat. Her presence there dismantled a plan. Her mere existence was a form of resistance. And this demanded a new posture from her, no longer simply to survive, but to act with initiative, courage, and above all, intelligence. In the same hiding place, there was a loose sheet of paper with notes handwritten by her father. There, he expressed his fear that he was being slowly poisoned, mentioned strange symptoms, and left clues that he suspected the doctor and his stepmother. The shock was like a punch in the gut. It was the beginning of a denunciation never made, a cry stifled by convenience and appearances. And now it was up to Jully to complete this cry, give it voice, transform commotion into justice. From that moment on, she understood that the fight was no longer just internal. It was a battle for truth. And to win, she would need to delve even deeper into the depths of this conspiracy. But what Jully didn't expect was that the web was larger than she imagined. There was still one piece to this puzzle, a hidden presence she hadn't considered. And the discovery of this new name would come like a bolt from the blue, revealing that the conspiracy was more complex and closer than she had ever imagined. Jully and Robert followed the clues their father left as if they were diffusing an emotional bomb about to explode. And it was in the back of the basement, behind a wall with cracks disguised by fresh paint, that they found this secret space. A stuffy room, filled with old boxes, recording reels, and a smell of neglect. In the corner, hidden under musty cloths, sat an old tape recorder. Robert, with steady hands, adjusted the tape. The initial hiss gave way to his father's tired but unmistakable voice. "If you're hearing this, it's because something went wrong. Don't trust them. The truth is in the office." Jully's heart nearly stopped. Her father had anticipated the worst. He knew he was surrounded, and he was trying to document everything, It was more than fear. It was lucidity. The courage to leave a trail, even knowing he might never be able to retrace it. The subsequent recordings were fragmentary, snippets of conversations captured in secret. Discussions between her father and the doctor. The doctor's voice was clear, authoritative, threatening. He spoke of intervention, control of assets, emotional destabilization as a clinical justification. Then came her stepmother's voice, cold, speaking about making it seem natural and ensuring Jully is never taken seriously. The words cut like blades. But what paralyzed Jully was a third name mentioned, someone she had previously considered neutral. An old family friend, present at childhood parties, her father's financial advisor. He too was part of the plan. He was the one who handled the paperwork, who interconnected interests, who manipulated the legal side of the inheritance. The conspiracy, now complete, showed that Jully was ensnared in a web that went beyond the emotional. It was institutional, cruel, perfectly thought out. And she was the last obstacle between them and absolute control. Shock gave way to determination. Jully understood there was no longer room for doubt. It wasn't illusion. It wasn't imagination. It was truth, pure and painful. And pain, when crossed with awareness, transforms into power. Alongside Robert, who was proving increasingly loyal, she devised a plan to escape the mansion without arousing suspicion and deliver the recordings to a reliable source. It was necessary to act with intelligence, collaboration, and strategy. They knew they were being watched. They knew that, with any slip-up, they could be silenced as well. But Jully was no longer the woman who arrived there weakened. Now she was the reflection of someone shaped by overcoming, guided by truth, and driven by the need for justice. And deep down, she felt this was the decisive moment. Because what came next would require more than strength, it would require faith in herself. Faith that, even in the face of everything, she could still prevail. The early morning silence was broken only by the sound of the living room clock striking the hour. Jully sat on the bedroom floor, her eyes fixed on one of the letters her father had left. A final handwritten note in which he said, "If you make it this far, it's because you have more courage than I ever had." That moment pierced Jully with an inexplicable force. It wasn't just about justice, nor just about truth. It was about reconnecting with her own essence. For the first time in years, she no longer saw herself as a patient, as someone fragile or unstable. She recognized herself as a strong, resilient woman, guided by an integrity that the world had tried to erase. It was a moment of reconciliation. With her own history, with her own pain, with everything she had been and everything she now chose to become. From that moment on, she decided she would no longer run away. The turning point didn't come with screams or outbursts. It came with a serene silence, with the kind of peace that only comes after a storm. Jully took a deep breath and, with Robert at her side, drew up a detailed plan of action. She would use the intelligence she had cultivated, the insight her grief had taught her, and the hope she kept alive like a burning coal in her chest. They divided the recordings, sent copies to a trusted lawyer outside the city, arranged a meeting with a local journalist, and prepared for a fake meeting with the conspirators. It was time to turn the tables. Jully knew the initiative was risky, but not acting would be a betrayal. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Her greatest proof lay in the path she had taken, the choices she had made, the humanity she had preserved even while being treated as crazy. And that, no one could ever erase. In the final meeting with the three involved, the doctor, the stepmother, and the financial advisor, Jully didn't tremble. With a firm voice and a direct gaze, she presented everything she knew. She said the evidence was already secure and that justice would be served. The stepmother tried to laugh it off. The doctor threatened to sue. The counselor tried to negotiate. But none of them were prepared for the new power Jully wielded. The power of truth. of lucidity, of the profound understanding of someone who had faced hell and come back stronger. That moment wasn't just a personal victory. It was a declaration to the world that no one has the right to silence a soul. That kindness, even wounded, never dies. That self-love is a weapon against manipulation. And even though the faces before her hid new strategies, Jully knew the final piece was yet to fall into place. When Jully walked into the city police station with the recordings in her hands, she was no longer the same. She carried with her not only the evidence of a conspiracy, but also her own reconstruction. The police chief, initially skeptical, fell silent when he heard her father's voice on the tapes, mentioning name by name, fact by fact. The case spread. Quickly, the journalist who had received the files publicized the story as a public complaint. Pressure mounted. Within days, a formal investigation was opened, and justice began to move. The stepmother was questioned, the doctor removed from his post, and the counselor was exposed for document manipulation. The masks fell one by one, and in that controlled chaos, Jully remained standing, sustained by the strength of someone who refused to be consumed by the madness of others. What was once a cry of despair became an echo of liberation. But the greatest transformation was not legal, it was internal. The girl who had arrived at the mansion carrying the weight of doubt, insecurity, and guilt now walked with her shoulders straight, not out of arrogance but out of dignity. She had understood that the mind is not the enemy. That fear is real, but can be faced with support, love, and above all, truth. During the process, she gave interviews, participated in discussion groups on mental health, and was invited to write an article on using writing as a tool for coping. Robert remained by her side, silent, with the same gentle gaze as at the beginning. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't plan anything romantic. They simply existed, together in a partnership steeped in respect, compassion, and integrity. It was a bond made of humanity, not promises. And this connection, more than anything else, healed. The mansion, once burdened with secrets and silences, was sold. Jully decided she wouldn't keep roots in a place where pain had been cultivated so zealously. But she took with her a box containing notebooks, letters, and memories that now had new meaning. She transformed part of this story into a small book, distributed free of charge to young people undergoing psychological treatment. Her gesture was more than symbolic. It was an act of altruism, a surrender to the world of what had nearly destroyed her. Now walking the streets, Jully was no longer seen as the missing man's daughter or the unstable woman. She was a symbol of overcoming, resilience, and hope. And even knowing that the path to healing is long and without guarantees, she chose to walk it. She chose to live with honesty, sensitivity, and wisdom. Because in the end, the last piece of the puzzle wasn't about what happened to her father. It was about who she had become. After everything you've heard here, tell me, how many times have you been silenced? How many times has your pain been ridiculed or your truth discredited? Jully's story isn't just a psychological thriller. It's a cruel and necessary mirror of what still happens every day to real people in seemingly normal homes, amid polite smiles and words that silently wound. This story invites us to reflect on something fundamental. How many voices are we ignoring? How many people around us are being labeled weak or unstable, when in fact they're just trying to survive emotionally toxic environments? And even more so, how many times have you been the Jully in your own life, struggling to be heard, to be taken seriously, to be treated with even a modicum of respect and empathy? So if this content touched something deep inside you, don't keep it to yourself, share it. Comment below. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a similar situation? What would you do if you were Jully? Let's transform this space into a place of dialogue, healing, and inspiration. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and come with us to delve into more stories that challenge, move, and awaken. Because when a truth is told, it can no longer be silenced.